The air in the arena was thick with that peculiar charged atmosphere that only a live professional wrestling event can generate. It wasn't the electric buzz of excitement yet, but the low humming anticipation of a major show. We were deep into the second hour of the broadcast. The main event for the Women's Championship was slated to be announced soon, but the crowd felt sated. They'd seen good matches, sure, but nothing that made them genuinely forget their week, nothing that demanded they jump out of their seats and make noise that would travel through the walls. On the hard cam side, the lights cast long shadows, revealing the quiet industry of the production crew, oblivious to the history they were about to witness. The chatter amongst the rows was predictable: fantasy booking, complaints about recent angles, and the casual checking of social media. This wasn't a demanding crowd, but a waiting one. Waiting for the impossible. Waiting for the unexpected gift. They didn't know how deep this sense of lack ran through the very fabric of the company, AEW. For months, something had been missing, a certain star power, a final piece of the puzzle that nobody dared to whisper the name of. Not even the most cynical of dirt sheet writers. The commentary booth was running through promotional spots, their voices smooth, predictable, building the usual hype for the coming week. No rumor, no leak, no hint. Just the soft, steady rhythm of a wrestling show in progress, utterly unaware that the ground beneath it was about to give way. The feeling was a deep, almost spiritual calm, the kind that precedes an earthquake. The camera panned over the audience, capturing faces lost in contemplation, eyes fixed on the entrance ramp, looking for something more. Deep in the labyrinthine corridors backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of controlled chaos and focused energy. Wrestlers taped up, coaches barked instructions, and the low roar of the audience was a distant, comforting heartbeat. But there was a noticeable tension, a specific kind of nervousness hanging around the locker room door, marked reserved. It had been vacant all night. Everyone knew who it was reserved for, but nobody spoke her name, treating it like a fragile, unmentionable secret. The reigning women's champion, a formidable figure in her own right, paced near the curtain, her eyes darting nervously between the monitor showing the ring and the empty corridor. Her match was moments away, yet her focus was split. She'd been told the plan, but the reality of it felt like staring into an abyss. Her legacy, her whole run, rested on the gravity of this unannounced moment. One veteran wrestler, a quiet, stoic presence, leaned against a flight case, his eyes closed. He'd seen 1,000 debuts and 100 returns. But this one felt different, weighted by years of industry speculation and personal sacrifice. The entire company had moved with deliberate caution, a ballet of secrecy where phones were confiscated and scripts were delivered verbally, face to face. The pressure wasn't about the logistics of the return. It was about the emotional toll it would take on her and the sheer, unadulterated impact it would have on everyone else. The silence around her presence was the loudest thing in the building. It was the moment of truth, a high-stakes gamble on nostalgia, legend, and the raw, unpredictable emotion of a live crowd. The announcement for the main event match was in progress. The women's champion had made her entrance, soaking in the mixed reactioner blend of respect and mild boredom. The challenger's music hit, a competent but unremarkable theme, and she made her way down the ramp. The match felt like a placeholder, a necessary cog in the machine. Then, the inevitable occurred, a sudden, catastrophic power failure. Not a glitch, but a deliberate, jarring blackout. The house lights went out, the jumbotron went dark, and the music cut abruptly, leaving a sudden, deafening void in the arena. The 10,000-plus fans went from mildly engaged to instantly confused, a collective, questioning murmuring filling the space. This was not the typical dramatic light flash. This was silence. In the darkness, the only visible thing was the faint glow of the ringside barricades and the small, flickering screens of cell phones, quickly being raised by the disoriented audience. It lasted for a long, agonizing 15 seconds. Enough time for a ripple of concern to spread, enough time for the fans to realize this was too deliberate to be a mistake. Then, a single, solitary spotlight hit the entrance tunnel, cutting through the dark like a blade. The murmur stopped. The confusion evaporated. Every person in that building held their breath, their hearts beating in a shared frantic rhythm. The stage was set. The universe had gone silent, waiting for the one sound that would tear it all apart. And then, the sound, it wasn't just music, it was a memory, a feeling, a sudden, brutal shockwave of pure emotion. A low, distorted guitar riff, a familiar and aggressive beat that had been dormant for years, ripped through the colossal sound system. The reaction was not a cheer, it was an explosion. The building didn't just make noise, it physically rocked. Phones that had been raised to capture the dark were instantly repositioned, shaking violently as the fans screamed. It was a sound of disbelief, of immediate, unadulterated joy, a cathartic release of years of waiting and hoping. Adults were crying, strangers were hugging. The reigning champion in the ring stood frozen, her face a mask of awe and terror, realizing her moment had been completely obliterated by a 4-second musical cue. And there she was, stepping out of the darkness and into the single spotlight. She hadn't changed, yet everything had. The familiar swagger, the defiant stare, the pure, untamed aura of a genuine legend. The crowd was a wave of sound, a roar that broke the decibel meter. She hadn't even taken a single step down the ramp, but the world had already shifted. AEW had indeed triggered the biggest return of the year, but the immediate, visceral force of the reaction was entirely unanticipated. The digital world was simultaneously combusting, but here in the live arena it was a fundamental human reaction, a collective, primal scream of "I can't believe this is happening." This was not a wrestling moment. It was a cultural event sealed by one single, unforgettable chord. The moment the music hit, the digital world went from a gentle flow to a Category 5 hurricane. Within 60 seconds, the phrase "she's back" had eclipsed every other trending topic globally. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok all became saturated with grainy phone footage, punctuated by all-caps reactions and crying face emojis. AEW's official social media channels, which had been posting standard content, were instantly overwhelmed, their feeds crashing under the sheer volume of mentions and shares. Analysts would later confirm a phenomenon, a specific type of mass-market, organic, cross-demographic engagement that hadn't been seen since the peak of the Monday Night Wars. This wasn't just wrestling fans, this was everyone who had a childhood memory attached to her name. The narrative was perfect, the unexpected, the impossible, the legend finally home. The online media machine, usually so cynical and focused on the negative, was forced into a state of stunned awe. Headlines were rewritten mid-publication. Editors scrambled to find decade-old footage and sound bites. The return wasn't just a moment in a wrestling show. It was a piece of pop culture history being written in real time. The story wasn't about the match she would have, but the pure, seismic feeling of her reappearance. Every reaction was amplified. Every meme was instantly viral. It became a perfect storm of nostalgia, validation, and genuine shock. AEW hadn't just gotten a star back, they had become the center of the global entertainment conversation, simply by keeping the best secret in the history of the business. While the world was celebrating, the unseen consequences of this digital tsunami began to manifest. Competitor companies, particularly the one where she had built her unparalleled career, went into immediate damage control mode. Board meetings were called at midnight. Stock prices for certain entertainment rivals saw a negligible but noticeable dip, and their talent rosters were instantly plunged into a state of demoralizing self-doubt. The comparison was unavoidable. Their homegrown legend had chosen the competition. Furthermore, the immense focus on her return instantly overshadowed every other storyline, every other wrestler, and every planned angle in AEW. Wrestlers who were scheduled to debut or announce major news the following week saw their moments vanish into a black hole of media attention focused solely on the returning star. Backstage, the cheers were mixed with a creeping fear. Could anyone live up to this level of expectation? Could the company possibly sustain this momentum without completely altering its identity to revolve around this single, enormous presence? The pressure was now monumental, a weight pressing down on the shoulders of every writer, every producer, and every single person on the roster. The victory of keeping the secret was complete, but the cost was the sudden, total destabilization of the company's internal ecosystem. The triumphant cheers of the crowd were the sound of an impending, glorious chaos that would require an entirely new approach to storytelling. Miles away from the arena, in a quiet, unassuming living room, the immediate fallout was intensely personal. Her family, who had lived through the grueling, non-stop pressure of her first career, watched the footage not with the screaming excitement of the fans, but with a quiet, knowing apprehension. Her spouse, who had been the only other person privy to the monumental decision and the weeks of secret planning, sat stone still, his hand resting on the back of the sofa. The sound of the crowd's roar, piped through the television speakers, felt less like an ovation and more like a warning bell. They knew intimately the price of that kind of fame. The endless travel, the physical toll, the crushing expectations that only increase when a legend makes a comeback. Her young child, who had only known her as Mom, a quiet domestic anchor, watched the footage of the screaming, larger-than-life figure on the screen with a mixture of confusion and wide-eyed wonder. It was a sudden, jarring introduction to the woman the world knew, a persona that felt almost like a stranger. The return wasn't just a career move. It was a re-entry into a life that demanded every ounce of her time and strength. The initial joy of the surprise was quickly replaced by the weight of the reality. The peace they had painstakingly built over the last few years was now over, replaced by the relentless glare of the spotlight. The applause was for the legend, but the consequences were borne by the mother, the wife, the person who had just walked through that curtain. The current women's champion, whose championship match had been reduced to a footnote, walked slowly back through the curtain. She wasn't angry, nor was she defeated. She was overwhelmed. The sight of the legend standing in the ring, holding a microphone and addressing the still roaring crowd, felt like staring up at a monolithic statue. For the past year, the champion had carried the company's women's division, her hard work and dedication slowly building credibility. In one soundbite, all of that groundwork was overshadowed. She felt the sudden, agonizing pressure of having to measure up to a perfect memory, a curated legacy that had only grown grander in its absence. She stood sweating near the empty locker room and finally understood the true cost of her title. Before, she was the champion. Now, she was the inevitable first target. The measuring stick, the challenger to a myth. The entire narrative of her career was instantly rewritten, not by her own actions, but by the shadow of the woman who had just returned. Her upcoming feud with the legend would not be a wrestling match. It would be a clash between a living legacy and a desperate attempt to create a new one. The weight of the division, which she had proudly held, now felt unbearable because the whole world was watching, waiting for her to fail the test of facing a genuine icon. The sun rose on a world utterly saturated with the news of the return. The wrestling narrative was now dominated by one name. Backstage, the atmosphere was one of profound, exhausted relief mixed with buzzing anxiety. The numbers were astronomical. Social media engagement, YouTube views, and ticket pre-sales had all shattered previous records. Tony Khan, the company's owner, was reportedly in a state of euphoric exhaustion, having pulled off the industry's greatest coup. The returning legend herself sat in a private trailer, away from the chaos, quietly reviewing the footage of her walk down the ramp. She wasn't watching the crowd, she was watching herself. The truth was far deeper than any fan theory. She hadn't returned for the spotlight, the money, or even the wrestling. She had returned because of a quiet conversation she had with the owner months prior, a conversation centered on the mental health crisis sweeping through the current locker room. She saw an industry of young talent struggling with the pressure of a 24/7 digital world, lacking a true, stabilizing figure to share the burden of leadership. Her return was never meant to be a permanent, full-time comeback. It was a one-year commitment to be the anchor, the shield, the undeniable presence that could draw the heat and attention away from the young stars, giving them the breathing room to grow without the crushing weight of immediate, massive expectation. It was a sacrifice of her peaceful retirement for the sake of the industry's future. The twist was this. Her return was not primarily about her story, but about providing the space for others to tell theirs. The media and the fans saw a superstar looking for one last glorious run. Her colleagues saw a legendary figure descending from the mountaintop to validate their work. But the real unseen purpose was an act of profound, selfless mentoring. Her first promo delivered that night wasn't a challenge. It was a rallying cry that subtly shifted the focus from her to the women's division as a whole. She didn't bury the current champion, she elevated her by saying, "I've been watching you all year, and you are exactly why I came back to remind the world what a true champion looks like." Her legacy pressure wasn't about winning a title. It was about ensuring the company she returned to was stable and strong enough to thrive after she left for good. Her greatest match would not be in the ring, but in the quiet, supportive conversations she would have backstage with the young talent, validating their fears and building their confidence. The moment that broke the internet was an emotional hook, not for a personal glory run, but for a profound, unseen act of service, quiet sacrifice of her own peace to shoulder the burden of a whole generation. The legend was back, not to conquer, but to secure the future.